Welcome, gentlemen, to Man's Hour, episode 50. Woohoo, the big 5-0. Oh, I'm excited for this one. We, of course, are going to be covering the man, the myth, the legend, Conan the Barbarian, classic 1982 movie. I just had to, for episode 50. He's the mascot of the show.
How old were you in 1982?
Yeah, exactly. This is why it's gonna be fun conversation because I was talking to Robert before he showed up in the call, Vince, but he saw the movie actually in theaters. When did you see it in theaters?
Movie theaters. I was 12 years old.
Oh man, that must have been so cool. You guys had like the best movies in the 80s, man.
We did. Everyone, you guys, I feel sorry for a little bit. Part of me is like, I'm glad I experienced that, and the rest of you fucks didn't. So.
But, we also had the best looking high school girls, I think.
Oh my god, yeah, 80s and early 90s hair.
Yeah. So,
and there was maybe one fat chick.
There was like,
It seems like Elysium compared to now,
It was pleasant. I mean, it had its drawbacks, but for the most part, it was a nice decade.
Yeah, and plus we had our childhood in the 70s. So I mean, the very first football game my dad took me to, I missed some brilliant play because I was staring at the high school cheerleaders. So
absolutely.
I mean,
well, before we get into it here, I suppose I should introduce my two lovely gentlemen that have come to join me tonight. Two guys from the Masculine Geeks. So Mr. Robert Kuzland, making his return to Man's Hour, of course, a veteran of the show. How are you this evening, sir?
Doing well. Even one of the only things I've got, my Japanese copy of the Blu-ray from the movie.
Oh, wow.
Because why wouldn't I have a Japanese copy of the movie on Blu-ray?
Have you ever listened to it in Japanese?
It is interesting.
I was going to say that has to be funny as fuck.
well, with Boku no name wa Conan desu.
Exactly.
It's just great stuff.
Was that actually Mako that was reading in Japanese? Because he's a Japanese guy, right?
I do not remember because I've not watched all of it in Japanese. So, but Mako has such a great voice anyway, and that whole opening narration is just really cool. But
yeah,
anyway,
guys my age would recognize him as Aku from Samurai Jack or Iroh from Avatar. Yeah, he's got a fantastic voice. But and rounding up the panel, we got Vince from the Masculine Geek. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? Thank you for having me on.
Oh, yeah. We had such a great chat last night on your own channel, which you guys should go check out over the Masculine Geeks.
Thank you. That was fun. It's nice to get the group of us together and just shoot the shit, hang out.
Yeah, and make fun of Clary. Yeah.
That's pretty much every show. Even the D&D sessions.
You have to do that. That's part of the requirement.
Clary jokes.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Well, gents, before we actually hop into the movie itself here, tell me about Mr. Howard. Tell me about his books. Tell me everything, because I'm sure you guys are going to know way more about the subject than myself. So who wants to go first? Go.
Good, Robert. You can go.
Well, I'll just say one of the big things to keep in mind is that as much as I love the 1982 Conan the Barbarian, and as much as I think it's a really deep philosophical movie that has a lot of wonderful moments, it is John Milius's Conan the Barbarian. It is not Robert Howard's Conan the Barbarian.
Doesn't even look like him.
No. And Howard's Conan is far more articulate. He's also, compared to Schwarzenegger's limited dialogue, more verbose.
Yeah. He's doing wow more than he has.
And plus Howard has such a beautiful poetic writing style. And part of that, I'm sure, is because a lot of these guys are getting paid for the word. So the more words you can use, the more, that's another penny. So, or another 10 cents or another whatever, the rate they were getting paid for writing for any given publication.
If they got paid at all.
Yeah. He also reused certain story elements and ideas across characters. So for example, his Kull the Conqueror and Conan the Barbarian basically have a similar story from a time when they were kings and becoming kings. And so it's a very different character in Howard's work. There is a lot about Howard that if you read both his writings, fiction and otherwise, and the otherwise being letters to friends who are other prominent authors of that time period, and even reading some of the stuff from what Noveline, I can't remember her last name, but
Noveline
Price, yeah, who wrote a book about her relationship with him, which was turned into a movie. There are many elements about him that you would be like, oh my God, this man is like the grandfather of the red pill. And he is so red pilled. But he was also a mama's boy. And there's a lot of indication and direct correlation that his suicide is because of that mourning and of his mother and stuff, like most men, there are certain conflicts, and it's like certain things and complexities, because we are not one-dimensional characters, or at least we weren't always. And he, so I'll let Vince expand upon some of that. But I mean, there's a lot to be said to read his work, not just his works of fiction, but also the letters he wrote to guys like Lovecraft and
that's exactly.
so forth.
I'll wind up.
And yeah, there you go, Vince.
I'll wind up before the end of the show. I'll show you the books. So it's called Means to Freedom, and there are 2 volumes, maybe even be 3, but I have the first 2, and the book is about 1.5 inches thick, and it's nothing but letters back and forth between Lovecraft and Howard. Lovecraft was a cosmic fiction writer, and Howard was a little bit, but more of the low-end fantasy, sword and sorcery. He did some fighting stories. He did the Solomon Kane. That's where the sword and sorcery and a little bit of the fantasy comes into play. But it's important to note the title, Means to Freedom. Not just the letter writing and, speaking your mind in the letters, because they wrote prodigious, long-ass letters. I mean, just remember, there was really no television. You had radio. The publications that were out there were few and far between. So your social circle was limited to where you lived. And if you wanted to expound upon that, like we're doing here, we want to expound our social circle. So we all come from different parts of the country, and we meet up here in the virtual space. Obviously, they didn't have that. Their space was letter writing. And Lovecraft was pretty long too with his letters, but I remember just call him Robert. Robert wrote a letter to Lovecraft that was 12 pages long. Now, 12 pages of the book in small little print, which probably equated to about 36 or 40 handwritten pages or typed pages. So that gives you an idea of the literacy of these 2 gentlemen, and the willingness to share ideas and do what we're doing here, but in letters. So the Means to Freedom, most of Howard's characters, if not all, were wanderers. They were men who walked alone. Not to say they didn't have friends or people they cared about, but they were confident characters that were strong both in body and mind, and they got shit done. Now, I think that kind of personality appealed to Robert, and that's something he aspired to. I remember during the movie that Robert's talking about Noveline Price and Robert's relationship, there's a scene where she wants to know about one of his new characters, Conan, and this was actually in the letters between and the writing of Noveline, but they took it into the screen and they showed. What's his face playing Robert E.
Vincent
Howard?
D'Onofrio.
Vincent D'Onofrio, fantastic actor, and I forgot his name for a moment. So he's stepping back from the car where she's sitting on, and the headlights are shining on him. In the backdrop, there's a cornfield, and he just kind of hunkers down and gets into the character of Conan. And as he's describing his character and what he's about and what he does, you can just see the man that he wants to be come out. And Noveline is just sitting there with her panties wet and practically biting her lips. And he didn't think he could be that in real life, so he put that into his characters, but you could see her latch onto that. So that means to freedom, I think that's very important, because I think that was his means to freedom, writing about these characters and these strong, confident men that could attract women and get the job done and have a code of honor, which Conan had a very, very strict code of honor. You read the books. He was also a thief as well, but a bit of an honorable thief. So
Indeed,
definitely pick up these books.
Well, let's actually get into the movie itself here. Now, of course, the movie opens with a certain quote from a certain German philosopher that we're all fans of, Mr. Friedrich Nietzsche, and the classic line being, "What doesn't kill you makes us stronger," which is a fantastic way of starting the film right there, and just sets the tone immediately for the rest of the movie, because, Conan kind of gets the shit kicked out of him for the majority of this movie. He definitely takes his slings and arrows for sure. He's definitely struggling throughout the entire film. He's on the run, he's getting in fights, he's getting the shit kicked out of him, he's sneaking around, he gets crucified to a tree, gets, almost brought back from the dead, essentially. There's a lot going on with this guy. So the man definitely suffers. But before we, expound more about the movie, there are 3 scenes in general that I think are really, really important. And the reason why I think this movie is so important, especially in our, extremely feminized age that we're living in. And one of them is the opening scene. And in the opening scene, you've got a young Conan who his dad is teaching him a lesson. He's teaching him the lesson of the riddle of steel. So why don't you guys walk us through this scene here as to what's going on? Robert, I'll give this to you because you brought this scene up actually when we did the Father's Day show. So take it away.
Well, the actor that plays his father is an actor by the name of William Smith, who a lot of guys, both acquaintances and people that we just run into, like to profit themselves as being, Renaissance men. William Smith genuinely was. He was a bodybuilder. He was multilingual. He served in the Air Force. He wrote poetry. He very much was a true Renaissance man. Those of you, he was the storekeeper in the movie The Outsiders. He was an agent for the government in Attack of the Bee Girls. He also played the Russian Special Forces general in the original Red Dawn. So brilliant, talented actor who just was perfectly cast, I think, to be the father of Conan. And while I won't rehash my connection with that in relationship to my own son, I will say in that scene, Conan's father is trying to set the stage for his life and explain some things to him. And his father had just made a sword, which I'd like to come back to later on in the show, because I think there's some important elements to that. But his father forges this sword out of steel, and he's talking to Conan about it. And he's talking to him about how fire and wind come from the sky and from the gods in the sky. But their god, the god of the Sumerians, the god of their family, is a god named Crom, and he lives in the earth, which is also where the elements that make steel come from. But that's an aside. And he talks about the giants that once lived in the earth, and how in the darkness of chaos, which is even a time prehistory, pre this telling, because what Howard was doing in telling these stories was kind of writing about the time before history and civilization in the world we knew it, what was going on in that time, not unlike what J.R.R. Tolkien did to give a prehistory to the peoples of Britain. And he talks about how the giants fooled Crom and took from him the enigma of steel, and how Crom in his anger shook the earth and woke the gods of fire and sky. And there was this war between the giants and the gods. And the gods won. They slew the giants. And as their rage settled and as the battle ended, they all wandered off, the giants dead in the field. But the other thing they left on the field was steel. And it was just mortal men who found this. And if I remember the scene right, he's like, "We who found it are just men, not gods, not giants, just men." And from that, they got the secret of steel and how it carries a mystery with it. And that Conan needs to learn its riddle. He must learn its discipline. And this becomes kind of an important part, that for no one in this world can you trust. Not men, not women, not beast. This, pointing to the sword, this you can trust. And that's kind of his introduction, and also kind of like telling Conan, these are the things you have to do. And to learn the riddle of steel means you must educate your mind. And to learn its discipline is kind of hinting that you must strengthen your body as well. And this duality that's important to a young man to grow and survive in the world. So there's a lot to that scene in that simple little, probably what amounts to like a paragraph of dialogue in the script. But
yeah, which is the only speaking lines for the first like 20 minutes of the movie.
Yes.
The rest of it is just, well, also we need to touch how amazing the soundtrack is throughout
Basil
the entire
Poledouris,
movie.
who is absolutely one of my very favorite composers. I like his work even more than John Williams. Had he lived, I would have hoped he would have been as prolific as John Williams. He very much has a certain sound. For those of you familiar with Red Dawn, Flight of the Intruder, Starship Troopers, Hunt for Red October, Big Wednesday, those are all things that Basil Poledouris scored. And he definitely has a certain sound, just like John Williams has a certain sound. Neither of which are as stealing from themselves as I think guys like Horner and stuff are, but none of them are probably as dynamic or as versatile as Jerry Goldsmith. But that's a whole other topic for a show I would be more than happy to do someday. But yeah, Basil Poledouris is absolutely great. He worked a lot with John Milius and scored a lot of his projects. He also worked a lot with Paul Verhoeven and scored a lot of his projects. So look him up. There are videos for all kinds of different things on YouTube. Do yourself a favor and listen.
Indeed, yeah, fantastic soundtrack all the way through. It's good music to lift to as well. If you're in the gym, it's fantastic stuff to throw on your headphones while you're doing squats or something. So definitely recommend it for people to listen to. But yeah, so that opening scene where he's getting the education from his dad, and also the only real like speaking lines that the dad gets in the entire movie, because shortly after that, the next scene is the small little village that they're living in gets raided by the antagonist of the movie, Thulsa Doom, played by James Earl Jones. Of course, people know him from Darth Vader fame. He just has such a commanding voice, throughout the entire movie. But yeah, so the entire village is slaughtered, and Conan is taken captive, and he's set onto the wheel of pain, for a period of time, that the movie alludes to us. It gives kind of like a Rocky style montage of him just pushing this wheel nonstop for years upon years. And he gets huge, gets strong and everything. And then the very first speaking lines in the entire movie that Arnie gets is, when he finally wins a couple gladiatorial matches and such, and they ask him what is best in life, and of course, Conan gives a legendary response of to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women, which, of course, has been memed to death and everything, but it's just delivered so well. And this is Conan now. He's baptized in blood, essentially. He's learning everything there is to know about war from the war masters and such, to become this great fighter and win everybody a bunch of money. But of course, he gets let free. And as he's on the run, he's looking everywhere for the sigil of Thulsa Doom, two snakes coming together. And of course, one of the things that's so amazing about this movie, and that you just don't see nowadays, is it really just is like, it basically is as masculine as you could possibly be. There's one guy on a quest for revenge. He finds his buddy, Sobodai, thief and archer, and they're just two bros, going out on an adventure together, helping each other out. Like, yeah, I'm going to help my newfound buddy here complete his quest for revenge and everything like this. And they learn from each other. They have some differences. Like, they have a interesting scene where they mock each other's gods. It's just like, oh yeah, my god is greater than yours, and things like this. But of course, they keep rocking on together and everything.
Well, it was a very logical theological debate, because they're talking about the differences in their gods, and it basically comes down to that Subutai gods are the four winds, and Conan's god is Crom. Crom is in the earth, where the gods of the four winds are above him. Therefore, they must be more powerful. and to all of that, Conan gives this really interesting kind of glare look at Subutai, like, I recognize the logic of your words, but they do not sit well with me. And it's just kind of a very humorous moment and all that. So
oh yeah, it's just like a exchange between two guys. They're allowed to disagree with each other, kind of deal. But I think I should also mention beforehand here the scene where he actually finds Sobadai. Conan is walking and wandering in the wilderness, and he comes across a witch's tent. And of course gets lured in by the seductress and the temptress woman kind of deal. But he does get the information he needs from her. She gives him the information of where he can find his next lead, clues, searching for answers, because he's constantly searching for this sigil so he could hunt down Thulsa Doom. Everything
and
like
all
this.
it cost him was going balls deep in a wolf witch.
Yeah, exactly. But that's I was mentioning before we went on air here that this movie has a lot of perennial truths about masculinity in it, and this movie certainly doesn't pull any punches with how it portrays women in all manner of ways. There's like your Lilith seductress character and the witch. There's the obviously the love interest of Valyria, which we'll get to in a moment here, and then the entire group of acolyte women in Thulsa Doom's camp. They're just sheep to the slaughter essentially. So this movie,
even that relationship with the princess, who is the captive and cult follower of Thulsa Doom, who by the way is a Cull villain from the books. Not Thophamon is from Conan, Thulsa Doom is from Cull, but that's a whole other different thing. But anyway, that the relationship with the princess and her father, King Osric, there's a moment where he's talking about his daughter and his daughter leaving him to follow this cult, and it's like, as if the secrets of her heart, I could not give those to her. And it's like that father, like, whatever questions my daughter had, I could give her that. I could give her everything she wants. But instead, she leaves and follows off and joins this cult. So, which there's some other elements to that I could go into, which even tie back to the beginning of the movie when Thulsa Doom kills Conan's mother. The symbolism in this thing, both purposeful and accidental, is just absolutely amazing. And even with the accidental stuff, I think I almost think it's because there is a up until recently, and even still recently, as much as people try to deny it and try to re-engineer it culturally, there are certain cultural truths, there are certain genetic biological truths that are imprinted in the hardware upon building a human being. And whether you consider that human being to be something of design and manufacture from divine origin, or from some other evolutionary hit and miss, trial and error over large periods of time, there are still certain universal truths biologically, culturally, that on a subconscious level are just there and can't help but be put into this stuff when they were making the movie, even when they weren't intentionally trying to make something symbolic. It's still there. And I think one of those subliminal, accidental things is there at the killing of Conan's mother, whereas a more intentional one is when Conan acquires the Atlantean sword, and he does this from this ancient king's tomb. And after taking the sword and beating off the rust and the sediment that had built up on the outside of the sword to see the beauty of the steel underneath, the skeleton of this king sitting on the throne bows his head and loses his helmet his very elaborate helmet and bows to Conan as the sword has been passed. So there's all kinds of speculation, and I think there's been some confirmation that basically that is the tomb of Kull, which is the whole reason it's referred to as an Atlantean sword, because Kull was of Atlantis. And so you have the bowing of the head from a previous hero of Howard mythos to this current or new hero of Howard mythos, of which Solomon Kane, hundreds of years later, will be the next generation of hero in Howard's mythos.
Right. So, I think another thing to mention about Conan's mother, I mean, that's ride or die right there,
Yes.
which that's a good woman. Damn right, protect the family to the last, could have easily just gone off and been a war bride essentially, but no, it's like husband and son are here, gonna defend them even if it costs me my life. So definitely a good woman for sure.
Yes, but even she gets charmed by Thulsa Doom.
She does.
And while that was magic, it's still the foreign man charms her, and she lets her guard down, and he kills her.
Yeah.
So there is a warning there that I think is subliminal to women, even. The dangers, and also you could even say it's subliminal message there for men about the fact that she will be loyal to you, but there will come a certain point where her life is more important than the life of her husband, or even her dead husband and her still living child. So if she's charmed, if the stranger, and you can throw other elements into that and get really into some deep weeds, but
well, it's just like that first scene we were going over with the riddle of steel. It's like you can't trust women, can't trust men, can't trust beasts, but this you could trust. You could trust the steel, you could trust yourself, your own strength, your own ability to act. It's very very Nietzschean in that way, almost like vitalist in that regard. It's like man of action, such, which why I think that scene is so important. And it's no accident that it was the very first scene in the entire movie.
No.
Yeah. Excellent. So moving on here, one of the second scenes I wanted to go over. So as Conan and Sobadai are making their way towards civilization to pick up the trail of Thulsa Doom and his cult following of snakes, they eventually get to a city. They go on a little fetch quest here, and they go in, they steal a jewel, and they kill this giant snake, and they run into Conan's love interest, Valeria, who is pretty handy with a blade, but by no means like girl boss bullshit that you see today. So that's extremely refreshing and such. And after they complete this heist in one of Thulsa Doom's temples, and they steal this great jewel and they kill a big snake and everything like this, they're called to King Osric, who sends them on their quest to go and fetch his daughter, the princess, from Thulsa Doom's Mountain of Power. And they're offered their weight in gold, to complete the quest, essentially. And they get taken back to the hut, and Valeria is desperately trying to convince Conan to not go on this quest. Don't go out for revenge. Let's take the gold and run. Sobadai agrees. We can go live the rest of our days, facing the world and everything. And, Conan has that choice, but it's also such a fantastic scene because there's just no dialogue from him at all. I mean, Arnie barely speaks in the movie, but that's besides the point. But he just doesn't speak, doesn't say anything. He just takes her to bed, fucks her, gets up the next morning and goes. He's going on his quest. He refuses the longhouse lifestyle. No, this is my journey. This is my quest. I will avenge my father. I will avenge my people. I will take back my father's sword that was stolen from me. So I think that's an extremely important scene as well there, especially given, like I was saying, our hyper feminized age here. I mean, maybe it was the smart choice to live out the rest of his days and, quiet contemplation with his wealth and his woman and everything like this. But no, absolutely not. He is a man. He's on a mission, and nothing is going to, stop him from completing his quest.
Well, and the thing is, part of that quest, he was set on even before his father and his people were slain. Because that's part of his destiny, is to solve the riddle of steel and to grow as a man. And I'm sadly in that point of life where there are times when it is much easier for me to take it easy and enjoy some of the spoils of my life's battles, as opposed to continuing to fight. But I mean, you know, I'm also in my mid-50s, so it's not like I'm a young man. So I think I'm allowed some of that indulgence. Conan at this point in his life is 24, and we know this because of a deleted scene, unfortunately, in the movie, an interaction between him and Subutai that takes place right before the battle at the end. And there's a scene where they are prepping all of the traps and the spikes and everything before the battle and before his prayer to Crom. And the wind blows, and he's like, you know, do you smell that? Do you smell that air? And Subutai looks at him, and Conan talks about the spring wind. And he's like, the last time I remember it was with my father deep in the woods, and the trees and the grass were so green, such a dark green, and the hint of spring. And I was only about 4 or 5, and that must have been about 20 years ago now. So we get his age. And he talks about wild blueberries blooming and everything else. And it's like, you know, the spring. And Subutai looks at him, and it's like, yeah, we have a wind like that blew where I grew up. And then Subutai has a line that's something along the fact that a spring wind always blows to the north of a man's heart, or in the north of a man's heart. And it's kind of an interesting scene. And then Conan goes, but I've never had that spring. It's my life has been torment and battle and constant warfare and pain and suffering and doing without. And you know, so that spring wind is not for us. And he looks at Subutai and tells him, you know, you can get out of this. You don't have to be here. And Subutai's like, no, there is no spring for men like us. It's just the wind that blows before the storm. And it's such a beautiful scene.
Yeah, I wish I was in there. I mean, Subutai gets some good scenes of him just being a bro already, like when he rescues him from the tree of woe and such, you know. But yeah, he's a cool character too. You know, he's got his moments. He's always there to back up his buddy. You know, it's so refreshing, you know, seeing that these days, because every single male interaction in a movie this day is immediately labeled as gay or something stupid like that. So, you know,
well, that's because you have a huge segment of female writers in Hollywood that don't understand the relationships between men. Secondly, you have a huge influx of females in fandom. Now, there have always been females in fandom. I can vouch for that in my lifetime. I know about that because I've read about them in fanzines and stuff from well before my lifetime. But in the numbers that they are now, they almost dominated. And as such, stuff is catered to them. And one of the things you see, especially from all the fanfic writers on Tumblr and the like, is all of that, which even goes back to the days of Kirk Spock / fanfic. Females' primary asset is their sexuality. And that is how they relate to things, and that is how they relate through the world. And that's why they always get naked whenever they want attention. The quickest way to get it is to show their breast. But they cannot conceive the concept of the brotherly bonds of love and affection that can exist between men that have absolutely no erotic element to them other than a deep abiding, we may not have been born of the same blood, but by the choices we have made and by our actions, we are bounded as brothers, and we will fight at each other's side, and we will die at each other's side, because of the love we have for each other is greater than the fear of our own mortality. It would be better to die here now in front of you at your side than to be a coward and run away. And that kind of fraternal bond, they cannot comprehend. And it's just a biological thing. And that doesn't make all women bad or anything else. It's not something that they can conceive of, just as there are certain things, the way women process information, that is almost impossible, if not impossible, for a man to understand, because we approach the world differently. Our language is different. Our thought processes are different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. No. And at one point in time, when people in politics and otherwise did not see the advantage of having us as adversaries, men and women, those differences were complementary and worked well together. And our strengths covered their weaknesses, and their abilities helped assist us and cover our weaknesses. And it made us a more formidable, we're the same bloody species. You know, Homo sapien sapien. I don't know how else to put it. We're male humans, female humans.
Yeah. Back in the before time, you know,
back in the before time.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we were two separate races from different planets, and Mars and Venus and whatever, and it became a marketing and a way to make money and a way to divide us politically and so on and so forth. But anyway, so that kind of stuff is important, and they can't understand it. Therefore, they immediately assume that there must be some kind of erotic component to it when there isn't, because they just don't get it. They can't.
Yeah, indeed. And back to our scene here about Conan refusing the longhouse lifestyle. I think it's the movie also shows a scene where after they've completed this heist in Thulsa Doom's temple, they have all these riches. You know, they're all rich beyond their wildest dreams at this point, and they partake in every desire. You know, they get the fanciest clothes, the best armor, the best weapons, the best food, and
all the whores.
Yeah, exactly. Everything. Conan gets his girl, you know, a smoking hot chick, you know, something he's never had in his entire life. He doesn't
Sandel
have to.
Bergman is absolutely gorgeous in this movie. She also played one of the muses in the movie Xanadu, one of the sisters of Olivia Newton-John, because Sandel Bergman is a dancer. She was a dancer by trade, which is why she is so athletically built and did so well at the sword scenes. Although, if I remember right, one of the stuntmen who got injured was injured in a sword fight with her. So,
sounds about right.
Yeah. But very graceful, very beautiful, long-limbed dancer's body.
Yeah.
So
gorgeous blonde, filled out all in the right places. And, and there's quite a bit of boobage in that movie as well for you guys to check out. So it's always a bonus, right? You know, something you don't see in movies these days either. It's just a pure masculine movie as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, which made 14-year-old me quite pleased by, despite sitting next to my father seeing it, which was awkward. Although not nearly as awkward as the lesbian vampire scene in The Hunger between Catherine Deneuve and the girl from the Rocky Horror Picture Show who was married to Tim Robbins. But the stories I could tell. But anyway, they not only do they have the wealth from Thulsa Doom, but they also have the wealth that King Osric gave them up front just to entertain the offer when he's pouring bowls of gems into their cups. So they have all this wealth and have indulged all of their vices and all of their carnal pleasures, but they're left hollow. And bored that there, there must be something more. And you're right. She tries to tell him, we have all this and we can continue to enjoy all this. And if ever there comes a time we need more money, we'll just steal it from someone. And no great danger do we need to imperil ourselves with.
She almost even like directly refers to the longhouse because she talks about how as she's growing up, she would always peer into other people's huts and other people's tents and see people together, and she never had that before. And she's just desperately trying to get Conan to embrace this lifestyle, like out of the cold, out of the wild and everything. But like Conan, that's not Conan. He'd be neutered then, which is basically what happens in the scene before, because he's so drunk the King's Guard are able to capture him and bring him before Osric. Now, of course, they didn't have violent intentions, but we don't know that until they actually finish the next scene. But just him being captured in the first place, that wouldn't happen if Conan was, a sober guy. He'd be drawing out his sword and going out fighting. But so it just shows you right there, like I don't know, like there's this line from one of the Nolan movies, one of the Batman movies. He tells Batman, he's like, victory has defeated you. And it's like, yeah, that's basically what he's getting at right there.
Yeah, there's a danger that comes with the domestication of a man. And it's one of the reasons why I like dogs so much. Human males and dogs have a lot in common. We both started out in ways as wild creatures, and we both got domesticated in different ways. But some of that is good, but you still have to have some of that wolf left in you. You still have to have some of that ape left in you. But what you do with it is, instead of preying on others, you defend your flock, which is usually your family, the woman you choose to bring into your life, and the children you choose to have with that woman, with your brothers, with your brothers' wives, with your parents, with your nephews, nieces, stuff like that. But the point is, you can't be domesticated to the point where you are some kind of little yappy dog, and you've got to still have a little bit of that wolf in you.
Exactly. And if Conan had been neutered, he wouldn't have been the kind of guy who would have attracted Valyria in the first place.
No, absolutely not, because that she could have probably have had her pick of any man she wanted, and probably a lot of them she could have pushed around, especially in Civilization. And this is something that is really expanded upon in Howard's writing: the difference between civilization and barbarism, and how barbarism is the natural state of men. Both very men as in male, masculine, but also men as in humanity. It is the natural state. And also, to Howard, it is the most honest state, because only in civilized society can I steal from you, can I take your women, can I dishonor you to your face, and you not even be able to touch me, because this is civilization. You can't do that. You can't resort to violence. We are civilized. Whereas in barbarism, no, you come into my home and disrespect me, I will turn you out. I will turn you out in a very unpleasant and aggressive manner, because you have been rude in my house. You disrespect my woman. You disrespect my child. You put harm to either of them. That is far more honest. That is far more real, legitimate, and honorable than society. And that's something Howard writes about a lot, especially in his letters to Lovecraft and to others. Clark Ashton Smith, amongst others, so a lot of different people with whom he conversed.
Yeah.
So
again,
and that's there in his fiction as well, in Conan, because Conan sneers at civilized men and how corrupt they are, and how barbarians do not have that luxury of that kind of corruption.
Yeah, indeed. Again, echoes of Nietzsche, like all the way through. Yeah, very much so.
Of Nietzsche, of Thomas Jefferson, of Plato. We could go through a whole list of various philosophers and men of politic who have talked about such things. And I think part of the problems we see now in our country is from our civilization,
right,
and how civilized we are.
Yeah, indeed. It's been far too easy for far too long. And these are the issues. Much of the issues of modernity come from that exact statement right there. But so naturally, of course, Conan basically just, fucks the crazy out of his girl, and wakes up the next morning and leaves without a trace. And he goes on his quest. He keeps marching,
And she sheds tears over it. She realizes what has happened, and is saddened by it. So
And so he goes on his quest, and eventually he reaches Thulsa Doom's Mountain of Power, where all the acolytes are gathered around like a medieval version of like Jonestown or something like this, with the Jim Jones leading over them, and through a bunch of trickery and stealth. Conan manages to get a hold of one of the priest's robes, and he gets to the inner sanctum, but he's found out and he's captured. And he's brought forth to Thulsa Doom for the first time in 20 plus years, of course. And Thulsa Doom doesn't recognize him at all, obviously.
Nope.
Well, because he's, I mean, how many villages do you think this guy raided and pillaged, throughout his days? One can only guess. But so he's brought forth, and this comes into one of the third scene I wanted to go over here. We again, the topic of the riddle of steel, which has been brought up multiple times throughout the movie. He brings it up when he's talking to Sobota. Obviously, Conan and his father are talking about it. But the riddle of steel is brought up once again here. And Thulsa Doom finally explains to him, his take on the riddle of steel. And he basically goes through this demonstration of, he has one of these occultists, one of these girls, basically kill herself in front of him. He has her fall to her death. She jumps down from the cliff edge to come down and see Thulsa Doom, and she kills herself. And he says to, Conan's like, that is strength. That is power. The strength and power of flesh. Well, which is a fantastic scene. So tell us about that, Robert. What do you think?
Well, the whole setup for that is he talks about the fact that you killed my mother, you killed my father, my people, you took my father's sword, and that's when Thulsa Doom is kind of has like it's like, oh yeah, it must have been when I was younger, and explains how there was a time when he searched for that because steel meant more to me than gold or jewels, which I think is important. I think that's an important line. Steel meant more to me than gold or jewels. And then Conan, the riddle of steel. And he's like, his eyes light up. Thulsa Doom's eyes light up. And he's like, yes, you know it, don't you, boy? And he's like, shall I tell you? And steel isn't strong. Flesh is stronger. And he does the thing. And he summons the girl. And she walks off the side of a cliff to her doom. And he's like, that's strength, boy. That is power. The strength and power of flesh. What is steel compared to the hand that wields it? Now, this is something important that plays out at the end of the movie. What is steel compared to the hand that wields it? Look at the strength in your body, the desire in your heart. I gave this to you. And then he's like, it's such a waste. Contemplate this on the tree of woe, and which of course he does in that magnificent mellifluence James Earl Jones voice.
Oh yeah, he's so good. He has very few lines in this movie, but all of them are excellent.
And this not only ties in with Nietzsche, but there have been several people who have written about the importance of flesh as well as the mind. So it's not enough to just have a strong and smart mind and nimble mind, but you also have to have a strong body in which to house it. I mean, let's think of someone. Oh, let's pick a certain astrophysicist who was bound in a wheelchair who died at somewhat of an early age. Could you imagine what Stephen Hawking would have been like had he been in a strong, nimble, athletic body? What he would still be doing, the energy he would have to spend on his efforts and his thoughts and so forth. And think about, the most athletic Chad Jock you knew who has trouble calculating 2 + 2. It's an incomplete man. And I mean, this is something that easily goes back to concepts of the Greeks. Look at their sculptures of the idealized man, but also understand the importance they placed, at least within certain Greek cultures, and also having a nimble mind. So, this movie really kind of hits upon the fact that it's all important. Even when Conan's taken to the east, they have the line about how reading and writing were made available to him, and the poetry of Kitai and the philosophy of Sung and things like that. So here he had spent the first, probably 18 years of his life building his body. And once they discovered that, his owner decides that there's value to him, that there's more to him than just a slave, and makes the teaching available to him, which again is all stuff not in the Howard book. That's not how Conan spent his childhood, but within the context of this movie, the body and the mind have to both be worked upon. So I know some people in various spheres, red pill or otherwise, seem to decry men reading books, but
a certain guy living in Romania that drives Bugattis,
who served way more jail time than I ever have. And
exactly.
But anyway, the importance of this is, look at actual people like Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was very much a man of action. He also was a voracious reader. Winston Churchill, man of action, who also collected a hell of a lot of toy soldiers, which I can relate to. Voracious reader, but also a man of action. It wasn't enough just to read about battles and philosophy and politics and poetry and whatever. You had to have the action as well. And in this movie, despite Arnold not having the acting chops or the articulation to really bring Howard's Conan to life the way it should have been, there are still moments and scenes where it's shown this deeper resonance of, you have to build your body, you have to build your mind. That willpower, which ties back into Nietzsche, is important. And that self-determination, that ability to persevere, to strive, to go forward, even when life gets easy, even when you have the option, which was presented to him in that earlier scene with Valeria, to stay put, to enjoy the luxuries that have been presented to him. And he says no. And this is why he says no, because of that desire, that is born forth. That desire in his heart is born forth by the strength of his body. So it's all connected.
What do we think about it's also interesting, Doom's last line there, where he says, like, I gave you this, which again will be important at the end of the movie there, but there is a point to that as well. It's like he is, this is why Conan has strived his entire life for. This is his mission, this is his goal. If he goes, then what else is he going to be? Well, it's an interesting thing to think.
Well, it's one of those things that you hear it all the time. Guys like Rollo will mention it, Ryan will, and some others. It's your enemies that make you stronger, not your allies. Because your friends will back you up and they will support you. Good friends will challenge you when you're being a schmeghead. And some of them will make jokes that $20 is $20. So I appreciate Aaron giving us 5 out of his 20.
Thank you, Cappy. Yeah, good to see you.
But your enemies steal on steel, stone on steel. It's that friction, it's that tension, it's that drives you forward. And referring to that at that end scene, that final moment between him and Thulsa Doom. And he looks, Doom looks at Conan and he calls him, he basically, my child and my son. And it's like, who is now your father if not me? I am the wellspring from which you flow. When I am gone, you will never have been. What would your world be without me, my son? And that's,
he just says it in a serpent's tongue too.
Yeah. And the thing is, there is elements of, and see, that's the other great thing. The villain in this movie says a lot of things, but they're all things that are true, or at least have truth within them. And some of them are greater truths. And this certainly is one, because while his father set him on this course and started him on his life, the father was taken away from him. And so it's been the desire for revenge, the desire for justice, the desire for recompense, however you want to put it, that was put into him by the actions of his enemy that set him on this course. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, Thulsa Doom is a father-like figure to him.
Mm-hmm.
But he is also the serpent that took away Conan's paradise, that took away his parents, that took away his people.
Took away his woman too.
Yeah. And ultimately took away his woman, which is interesting as well, because she, who is absolutely ride or die.
Oh, yes.
When Conan is dying after being crucified, she makes the deal with the devil, as it were. She makes the deal with the gods. Wizard, do whatever it takes to bring him back. I will pay with my own life. If the gods need a life, they can have mine in place of his. And she does that. And it's like that is ride or die. That is genuine desire, gentlemen.
Yep, that's a good woman. Yep.
Yeah. So, and she does, and she ultimately pays that price. And what's also kind of cool is there's that moment when she physically dies where she's lying there in his arms after she's been shot by a snake used as an arrow.
Which is a cool scene, by the way.
Where she's looking at him in the eyes and she's like, I want to breathe my last breath into your mouth. You know, she wants her last moment on earth to be embraced in his arms and kissing his lips. And, you know, that was a lot of heady stuff, you know, even at 14 for like, wow. Yeah. Nah. I want that kind of woman that, you know, that not only is super hot, but in her last moment, that's what she wants. That's what she wants to take into the next world with her. And so, yeah, it's just such a great scene. And can we talk a minute about the battle that also ties into all this?
Yeah, absolutely. One point I wanted to make, because on the same topic of Doom being Conan's father, it's interesting you point that out, because he pretty much is the highest figure in Conan's life at this point, even more so than his god Crom. And this is addressed in the scene, you know, the battle that we're about to talk about here, where he makes his prayer to Crom, and he says, "I've never prayed to you before. I haven't the tongue for it." And he goes through this rant, and he just ends it by saying, grant me one request, grant me revenge, and if you don't listen, then to hell with you. You know, so even, you know, his own god is not, you know, a huge impact on his life, even more than Thulsa Doom is, which is very interesting to think about as well. But yeah, let's go over the battle.
Well, I've got to do that scene because I absolutely love it. But it's like, you know, Crom, I've never prayed to you before. I have no tongue for it. No one, not even you, will remember if we were good men or bad, why we fought or why we died. All that matters is today, two stood against many. That's what's important. Valor pleases you, Crom, so grant me one request. Grant me revenge. And if you will not listen, then to hell with you then. This also ties into an earlier scene with Mako, where he's bringing them all this ancient armor and weapons. And they're like, Subutai is like, what's all this? And Mako's character, the wizard, is like, the gods are pleased with you. And so, you know, here's all this stuff for which they can use in this final battle. And Conan asks, it's like, are they going to help? And Mako looks at him and is like, no. And he's like, well, have them stay out of the way. And he cleaves with this axe. So it's like the gods have their place and the gods have their use. But if ultimately it's up to me to do the thing, then let me do the thing.
Yeah.
And then we go on.
You see similar moments like right from the Iliad as well.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like the gods are scared of, you know, Achilles and Hector, like on the battlefield, you know, themselves, you know. This is a very prominent in Greek mythology, you know, the ultimate, you know, destiny for, you know, the apex of masculinity of man is to become a god yourself. Right. The gods tremble before you. Well,
yeah. So, you know, and it's before this scene, and it's before Mako brings the armor, that the wind scene with the spring wind is there. So if you can find an extended edition of the movie, I know it's on the Japanese Blu-ray that I have. That scene is in it, so it's got to be on some home VHS or DVDs or
I'll have to look
something.
for it.
An expanded cut of the movie. But so we get to the scene in this final battle, and all this stuff is going on, and Conan is fighting with Rexor. Conan is wielding his Atlantean blade, the one he got from Kull's tomb. Rexor is fighting with Conan's father's sword, a sword that was forged at the hands of Conan's father. And they are fighting and going back and forth. And there is a moment where earlier on, Conan has gotten tripped up and Rexor is bearing down on him. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he comes down with a sword and another sword stops it. This massively bright, shining, silvered blade stops it. And then all of a sudden, the sword swipes across Rexor's eyes, blinding him. And then Conan looks up, and there, shining like a Valkyrie from myth and legend, is Valeria. And she kind of pats the sword and she's like, "Do you want to live forever?" And even from beyond the grave, which is something she had promised earlier in the movie, that even from beyond the grave, I will come to your side if needed. And she does, which is, again, just kind of an amazing scene, but it gives him a moment. Rexor recovers from this because he's basically blinded by the sun, is what it kind of comes down to, because this is all a metaphysical, magical moment. No woman stopped his sword blade or blinded him. It was essentially the sun that did it. He and Conan are going back and forth, cleaving, their massive tree trunk arms cleaving into each other with these blades. And then all of a sudden, Conan cleaves his father's sword in two and kills Rexor. The steel of Conan was stronger. The will of his flesh and his desire was greater than even his father's sword. And that is kind of a powerful moment that ties into it. Now, I know, knowing a little bit about bladesmithing, that earlier on when you're seeing the sword forged, one of the things that they do with the sword, which no one would have really ever wanted to do like that, was, they've worked the steel and tempered the blade, and they stick it into a pile of snow.
To quench it. Yeah.
To quench it. That logically would say, oh, this blade has been made brittle. I don't think they were thinking about that. It was all a visual, it looked cool in the movie thing. But so, you can be the hyper nerdy rational. Well, actually, his blade would have been more brittle. But that's not what's tying into this. It's the scene as the fact that Thulsa Doom is essentially proved correct. Conan's desire, his flesh, his will, which ties into Nietzsche, his will made manifest in that battle was stronger. So much so that he broke his father's blade. The son destroys the father's work, his artistry, his blade, this treasure that he's wanted back ever since he was a child. He breaks as a man and becomes his own person by force of his own will. But what's interesting is when we get to that final scene with Thulsa Doom, where he's talking about sword. Him and my son, it is his father's blade that he uses to kill Thulsa Doom. And after doing that, it is his father's blade. After he does this and salutes the gods, as he did when he was a gladiator, to show, I have had my triumph, I have had my victory, I salute the gods for this victory, he drops his father's blade. And
he abandons it, he leaves it.
And that's the end of the movie. There's another scene there, but obviously we're past the hour mark and I don't want to take up all of Hawk's time or his show, but I mean, there's a lot of symbolism there.
Yeah, it's a powerful scene because as we were alluding to this earlier, but as Doom is talking to him at the end, and he's got his whole, bunch of acolytes beneath him, all with their candles, like they're ready to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and as he's talking in this serpentine tongue and he's giving him that look, so we've seen Doom give the look to everyone else in the movie as if he's charming them to put him under his spell. And it looks for a moment that like Conan is being, put under the spell. He's like kind of lowering his arm a little bit. He's looking down. You can tell he's kind of thinking, but then, he just looks up in a split second, grabs Doom and just hacks off his head, with his father's sword, with two strikes, and just throws the head down and then gets rid of the blade. It's just this story is done. I've fulfilled what I've needed to do. And now I'm off to, my next adventure, wherever that may lead.
Yeah. And the thing that's kind of interesting is you've got to consider this movie came out in 82. It would have been in production maybe as early as late 80s, but certainly through 1981. And Jonestown was just a few years before that. In what, 77, 78. So that was still something I think fresh in people's minds. And one of the things that's also kind of interesting when you look at the dynamic, although there were male priests in Thulsa Doom's cult, obviously his two major henchmen were big male guys, one of whom is a former professional football player, and the other one was a bodybuilder and best friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who oftentimes appears in Arnie movies, even in very bit parts. He was even in The Running Man as the security officer. Oli something, I can't remember his last name, but anyway, a lot of the cult is made up of females, and that's not some throwaway thing, because
it's not by accident. No,
because if you want to have a cult and you want it to be successful, you have to have fanatical female followers, because, and this is true for Jim Jones, this is true for Charles Manson, because you need that feminine allure. You also need that feminine soft power, the shaming and the secrets and the social networking that women wield. And you need all of those elements to have a cult, any cult. So
indeed,
even one that starts with science and ends in ology. But even this is your channel, so I don't want to be too inappropriate. But
so go for it.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's no small thing. And so, yes, this is John Milius's Conan, and it's absolutely brilliant for being John Milius's Conan, even more so than Howard's Conan. But Howard is still in there, because you can't have elements of Nietzsche and even using some really bare-bone stripped bones of Conan, of Howard's work, even from other characters kind of thrown in to make what was there. And I think that's one of the reasons that its popularity has eclipsed other attempts to do it. And
I remember they tried to remake it in like the 2000s with Jason Momoa, and it just flopped horribly.
Yeah, and it's because a lot of that heart isn't there, and that deeper symbolism, and also I think it's just of its time, and it resonates because that stuff was appropriate. I saw it fairly recently. I guess it would have been last year. I saw a 35 millimeter print at a local theater, and got to watch it with a crowd. And it was interesting being in an audience, a modern audience, predominantly older, in my age and a little bit younger, but mixed audience, male and female. You could hear the uncomfortable laughter of certain women at certain moments in the movie, that they were like, they were about to have vapors. But you could also hear men laughing at certain scenes, and men like, yeah, at certain scenes. And it's like, so hopefully some, any of the women that were there with their men hopefully got a good spanking later that night.
Yeah, let's hope, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would probably be happy that they did. But
yeah,
no,
it'd be a much
just,
happier world if more men spanked their women. Yep.
yes.
Mhm.
Spank your women, not your children. There's your fatherhood advice from Uncle Robert today. But no, there's just it's interesting, like I said, to have watched it in a crowd, because I've not done so since the movie came out. I've only ever watched it with my children and friends and so on and so forth. One friend who was like, "Oh God, why do they always the Eastern swords arts? It's like European fencing." So yeah, those are some of the dudes I'm watching this movie with. But
amazing.
yeah, I
Well,
just know too many geeks and nerds.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so in conclusion about this movie, it doesn't have the best special effects. It doesn't have the best editing. It doesn't, hold up as well as, some other movies. But what it is, there's a lot of very deep-seated perennial truths about masculinity in this movie. And this is why it's important. And this is why people should watch it. And this is why people should show it to their sons. And this is why people should enjoy it. Because number one, we don't get movies like this today. But that's not the only reason. It's just, it really just is like the pinnacle masculine movie. It's got everything you need from it. It's a simplistic plot. It's just a revenge quest. But like all the things we've been saying here, there are deep truths here and a lot of meaning hidden in this movie. And that is why I think it's got a special place in all of our hearts. And there's a reason why, Conan is the mascot of the show. What is best in life? It's an excellent film. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's on Netflix right now at the time of recording. I actually watched it 2 days ago on Netflix in preparation for the show. So go ahead and watch it if you haven't before. You're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie you should watch, whether alone or with your buddies and your bros. You should definitely watch it with your sons. It's I would even go so far as to say not only does it have a lot of universal truths for dealing with men and masculinity, but I think it just has some universal truths to it, period. Male, female, it doesn't really matter. It just, the human condition is such that there are certain things that are important. And one of those things is that we do something. Because when we stop doing something, that's when I think we really start to die. If not a physical death, a death of spirit, which one could easily make the argument, I think, is even worse than the death of one's body. And because if you look around you, whether it's mass media, news, politics, whatever, yes, you can make the argument that some people are literally trying to kill you physically. But I think broader truth in all of that, and has been so for several decades now, is they are trying to kill your spirit. Because if your spirit is broken, you have no will to resist. You have no will to stand on your own. You have no will to stand and say no. And this is something that is important for all free men. If you cannot stand and say no to anyone, you are not free. Government tells you have to do this. You tell them no. Do you get punished or do you get rewarded? What happens? If you get punished, you're not free. You have to be able to say no. You have to be strong enough to say no. And you have to be willing, I think, sometimes to do the battle that comes with saying no. So I think this movie invigorates more than just, the desire to hit the gym, which I will say is important, and I need to do it more often than I have been. But the desire to just be willing to say no, to say, let's roll the dice. Come at me. Like King Leonidas said, come and get them.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Indeed. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up here. Thank you for Vince for showing up for a little bit, but work things. So as one tends to do, but definitely go stop by the Masculine Geeks and listen to these guys. Robert, anything else you want to plug?
At the moment, no. Every Wednesday night, we are either playing D&D on the Masculine Geek. One game, we are doing classic AD&D with a little extra OSR stuff thrown in, DM'd by Rollo Tomasi. And one of our other games is a Viking-themed campaign in a alternate Earth, using AD&D rules, DM by Drew Bay from Hit List. So if you're into physical fitness, check him out. And when we're not gaming, we have gentlemen conversations over bourbon, wine, brandy, cigars, and talk about life and masculinity and just whatever stuff we're into, usually with some kind of geek influence. Last night, Red Hawk was a guest on our show, and we had a great conversation with him and Ryan and a few others. So that's the regular Wednesday night show. Occasionally you'll see me popping up on YouTube, pirating music and talking about music for a little while. I've got something else I want to do. I just haven't got it going yet because I'm not sure anyone's even going to care, but we'll see what happens. And beyond that, you'll find me on Instagram and Twitter, usually posting toys or things related to Japanese model kits and anime and fiction and geeky stuff. I think I just recently posted my collection of the artwork of Robert Howard, which is a 4-volume set released by Trollord Games, collecting all of the artwork from the pulp era to present, focused on the work of Robert Howard. And it's a massive 4-volume tome, very impressive with some beautiful artwork in it. So that's the kind of stuff you'll find on my Twitter. You won't see me posting a lot about politics. I can go there if you want, but I would rather have fun talking about my hobbies.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, definitely check out the Masculine Geek. Yeah, exactly. Definitely check out the Masculine Geeks. There's always something fun going on over there. Like Robert said, we had a fun time last night on the show. It was a fantastic conversation. And then for myself, check out the channel, check out the Substack, check out the Old Glory Club and all the good stuff. And we'll see you guys next time